you said that Lockheed has possession of this machine that can do this, that can manipulate time, and they are going forward in time and manipulating the timeline. Who is doing this?
I hope Lockheed isn't doing it. No, I wasn't trying to suggest that they are.
Well, how do you know that this timeline is being manipulated? How do you know that? And who do you think is doing it?
There is a researcher, Michael Cremo, who wrote a book with a guy called Richard Thompson. Thompson's a PhD in, I forget which scientific field. The book was called Forbidden Archaeology. It's a tome. It's about this thick. It's in the same general area, same general vein of research as Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval and Robert Schoch, people who study deep history, prehistory, archaeological remains from prehistory that challenge our accepted views of the historical timeline, right? Except Cremo and Thompson's work in Forbidden Archaeology is more radical insofar as they go through the history of scientific journals back into the 1800s, and they show how many discoveries there were, reported by very prestigious publications, of clearly engineered structures and artificial objects stuck in geological strata that are millions of years old. Like polished concrete walls in a stratum that dates to, 200 million years ago. Or gold chains, jewelry that's at a geological stratum of 60 million years ago. There are tens and tens of these discoveries that they present in this book that were in prominent scientific journals, and then slowly in the 20th century were filtered out of what it was acceptable to publish, given what became the standard human history taught in the academies. Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of different ways you could look at that. One is you could imagine that even though there's not much of a fossil record for it, humanity goes back hundreds of millions of years on this planet. I doubt that very much. Because again, there isn't a fossil record for it. We find dinosaur bones all the time. We don't find large populations of humans that are contemporaneous with, the Jurassic period. The other way that you could interpret those findings, though, is that human time travelers, on a very limited basis, were living in those epochs and left artifacts behind. So that's one line of empirical evidence that you could use to argue for time travel.
So you're saying that this could have been happening in the 1800s?
No. What I'm saying is that up to the 1800s, these things were reported on in scientific journals, right? Like up to the 1800s, you had Smithsonian Institution and whatever reporting on a gold locket found in a geological stratum that dates to 60 million BC.
Yes.
Right? There are lots of these finds.
But we don't know about those anymore.
We have those journals. We have access to those journals.
We still have access to
Absolutely.
the journals.
My point is, Cremo and Thompson, they wrote this tome, Forbidden Archaeology, where they go through all of this evidence. They present case after case. And they have their own interpretation of what this means, okay? Because they come from a kind of Vedantic, that's the book. They come from a kind of Vedantic background. They subscribe to a form of Vedic religion. And in the Hindu religion, there is the notion that there are these vast cycles of time. They call them yugas, the ages, right? And we're in the last of them now, supposedly the Kali Yuga. But the whole cycle begins with the Satya Yuga, the golden age, and then it goes to a silver age. And the Greeks had the same thing, silver age, bronze age, until you get to our present time, which is supposed to be the last of the world ages. And this whole cycle then repeats itself. So Cremo and Thompson come from the school of thought that, look, humanity has always existed, and we are living in a fallen world. We're living in a degraded age, and we've lost our knowledge of previous ages of higher civilization. And they think this goes way, way back, like that humanity existed in its present form tens and tens of millions of years ago. I don't agree with their interpretation of their own evidence. I think that that's a religious belief system, which they subscribe to. And my much more radically empiricist, pragmatic approach to the data they're presenting is to say the best way to make sense out of this is that these artifacts were left behind by human time travelers, and that the past is contaminated by the future.
I see what you're saying. So that stuff could have been left by people that are even before us or after us right now.
Exactly. And to me, this is one of the reasons.
Wow.
This is one of the reasons why, or one of the ways.
This
in
is
which,
sort of the sorry to interrupt. This is sort of the opposite. Graham Hancock's idea is that there was a crazy advanced civilization that got wiped out by comets, and we hit a reset button. You're saying this advanced civilization was from the future.
Exactly. I started reading Graham Hancock when I was maybe 15. I read all of the books that he had published, back then in the late 90s. But then I did a lot more research. And see, the thing is, when you're coming from out of a background in philosophy, you have to engage with all kinds of different research domains.
Yes.
And one of the problems with anthropological researchers like Hancock, or on the other hand, UFO researchers, whether they're coming from a physics background or, I don't know, from a sociology background or whatever, is that they stay only within their own research domain and they don't look at what's going on in other fields. They're not interdisciplinary enough. And my work has been radically interdisciplinary from the beginning. So I've been able to cross-correlate different bodies of data. And one of the things that Graham Hancock talks about, which I find very compelling, is the evidence for Antarctica having been Atlantis. In his first book, Fingerprints of the Gods, where he's drawing from the earlier research of Rand Flemeth, he makes this, and Charles Hapgood. Flemeth's work was dependent on this historian, Charles Hapgood, who I think taught at Boston College back in the day. And Hapgood had this theory that, and by the way, Hapgood worked with the CIA for a time, so he was like a government-funded scientist. And Hapgood had this theory that, to oversimplify it, in the course of the various ice ages, the Earth becomes top-heavy. And at a certain point, the ice sheet pulls on the mantle of the Earth.
Yeah.
And it causes it to slip. It causes the surface of the Earth to slip over the mantle, like this loose skin of an orange. And that in some cyclical fashion, every, I don't know, maybe 12,000 years or so.
Pole shift.
Well, there's a shifting of the pole in the sense that by 3,000 or 4,000 kilometers, the location of the pole shifts. Not like drastically, like the Earth flips over or anything like that.
Right.
By a few thousand kilometers, which means that, let's say circa 12,000 years ago, 10,500 BC or so, the Younger Dryas period, Antarctica would have been mostly where Argentina is today and had mostly the climate of Argentina today, except one side of Antarctica would have been already inside the South Polar region. And we have evidence for this because apparently in Antarctica, the ice sheet is not thickest where you'd expect it would be, right at the South Pole. The ice sheet is thickest in the part of Antarctica that would already have been in the South Pole prior to the slippage of the crust.
Right.
Because it was the place where, there was already massive snowfall and so forth. See? So, and we also have evidence for this in Siberia in terms of this flash flooding and then freezing of the mammoths who they froze so quickly that they have undigested food in their stomachs, right?
That's where the Younger Dryas flower.
Right. So, but here's where I'm going with this, is that I think there's a lot of compelling evidence for the fact that Atlantis, or whatever we want to call this civilization that Plato writes about.
Yeah.
Plato says it was destroyed 9,000 years before his time, which lines up with, Hancock and Boval and Robert Schoch's
12,000
research.
years ago,
yeah, because 12,000 years ago, the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau line up perfectly with the three stars of Orion's belt, and the Sphinx is looking at its counterpart, the constellation of Leo, as it rises into the sky
at the dawn.
At the dawn on the spring equinox. Exactly. So that gives us a timestamp for when the Giza Plateau monuments were planned, right? But no, here's where I'm going with it, is somewhere much more interesting that has to do with time travel. If Atlantis was Antarctica, and they had such a high level of civilization, right? How high a level? How high a level? Look at the Baalbek platform in Lebanon. The stones in the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, which we still can't figure out how the hell these things were moved and positioned, they're in the hundreds of ton range. The biggest ones are in the hundreds of tons. At Baalbek in Lebanon, there is a platform which consists of three 1,300-ton stones. They're 1,200 to 300 tons a piece.
Yeah, we've gone over these on the. Can you pull up those Baalbek
And they
monoliths?
are raised on top of a 40-foot platform of smaller megaliths, right? Which, like, who does that? I mean, if you're going to drag stones this big, wouldn't you use them as the foundation course and then put smaller stones on top? No. These people apparently decided to show off by lifting these 1,300-ton stones, these trilithons, and putting them on top of smaller megalithic stones. And again, just like at Giza, just like at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, just like at various sites in Peru.
Look, is that one of them?
Yeah, well, no, look, that one that's just by itself.
The second one in the middle, yeah, with the red lines. Yeah, zoom in on that.
Yes, but I want you to go back to the other one too. Yeah, you can see the scale of a person next to those. Look at the one above there, how small a person is next to those.
Go up.
Yeah, look at that. Look at the scale of that. But if you could go back to that one that was buried.
Oh, the
yeah, okay,
guy?
right there,
That
okay?
one.
Now that is in the quarry where these stones came from.
Yeah.
That quarry is 50 miles away from the site.
Yes.
50 miles. How did they take 1,300 ton stone? 19 cranes of the highest industrial grade that we have today can't lift and move one of these. They've done the engineering calculations. How did they move that thing 50 miles? You know why that's buried there? Because they wanted to tell us that that's where the quarry was, and that they've somehow managed to move that stone 50 miles to build the platform at Baalbek. All right, here's my point. That gives you a sense of the level of engineering capability of this civilization. It's beyond ours.
Way beyond ours.
Way beyond ours.
The problem is there's no saw blades or toasters or anything in the desert out there.
And there's no large-scale evidence for this civilization other than these megalithic structures.
Nothing.
In various places in the world. You know where I think there's going to be a jackpot of a plethora of evidence for it? Under the ice of Antarctica. And here's where I'm going with this. If you're a civilization that advanced, why do you isolate yourself to Antarctica? Why would you do that?
Right.
You tell me. Any thoughts why you would do something like that?
Why you would isolate yourself?
Yeah, you have this level of technology, right? And after the cataclysm, you go around the world and you build these various megalithic sites, which leave a record of the level of your technical achievement.
How do we know it was after the cataclysm?
Well, we know Giza was after the cataclysm.
We do?
Yeah, I mean, the ground plan dates to 10,500 BC. And if you line that up with Plato, and you line it up with the end of the Ice Age and the massive flooding, it's just after that cataclysm that site was built. Also...
You're talking about the Great Pyramid.
Yes. The three pyramids and the Sphinx, and there are other structures like the Osirian at Abydos in Egypt that are all in the same style. They're all in this anonymous, high-precision megalithic style.
What did you say was the evidence that it happened 10,000 BC?
Well, the Giza ground plan, like we were just talking about.
The Giza ground plan.
Yeah, the alignment of the three stars of Orion, Orion's belt with the three pyramids, and the alignment of the Sphinx with its counterpart on the horizon, that gives us an astrological date of the age of Leo.
Yes.
And that happens to be right after the Great Flood took place, right? Through the melting of the ice sheets.
Between 12,900 years ago and
Roundabout
there's like
then.
1,000-year period there in the Younger Dryas.
Exactly. And this is, again, also when Plato tells us Atlantis was destroyed. But if you go to South America, the Mayans also say that the people who built these megalithic structures, the people of Quetzalcoatl, that the people of the feathered serpent, they came there after the Great Flood. That's what they say. And they started making these constructions there and teaching the locals agriculture and trying to restart civilization in various ways. So it also aligns with what the myths tell us. Now, my question is this. If you have that level of technology, why would you isolate yourself to Antarctica? Antarctica is a place that's completely isolated. Think about it, right? All the oceans of the world, the Atlantic Ocean,
Yeah.
Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, they meet around Antarctica, and it's sort of hidden away from all the other continents of the planet to the extent that we did not discover it until like the 1800s, except, of course, it's on a few anomalous maps. The Piri Reis map and the Orontius Phineas map and so on and so forth. But we didn't find, in our modern Western civilization, we didn't find the damn continent until the 1800s.
Did they think it was safer there?
Here's what I think. If they were time travelers, they needed to isolate themselves from the timeline. If you were coming from the year 2200 or the year 3500, and for whatever reason you needed to reach back into the deep past of humanity, right? Let's say Earth suffers some horrendous cataclysm, or let's say they fought a war with an enemy that vanquished them, and their only retreat was backwards in time, to hide in time. You might be motivated by some kind of, noble intention not to mess with the human timeline to the extent that you can avoid it. And initially, you might decide to quarantine yourself to a place where you're not going to be observed by the other evolving societies on Earth. And Antarctica would be the ideal place from which to do that on this planet.
Wow.
So I think under that ice in Antarctica, we're going to find the jackpot.